every person deserves access to clean water,
safe, affordable food,
and a livable climate.
I want to be part of a world that is fighting to make this vision a reality, and that's why I'm at Food and Water Watch.
Food and Water Watch's mission is to oppose corporate control and abuse of our most vital resources and ensure that government fulfills its obligation to protect our health, our communities, and our environment.
I saw the need for an environmental organization that would not be afraid to call for bold solutions to the problems we face. And the issues we work on are life and death issues.
Whether it's stopping water shutoffs for unpaid bills or stopping a power plant in somebody's backyard.
We've helped build out international movements against water privatization, fracking, and against fossil fuels.
We combine hard-hitting research, on-the-ground organizing, aggressive legal tactics, and deep policy work to make sure that we are aligned to get the policies that we need, whether it's the local, state, federal, or even global level.
Research, especially the way we do it here in Food and Water Watch, is pivotal. The process we have here, which is a lot of rigorous fact-checking, a lot of review, a lot of collaboration, ensures that we arm our organizers and our supporters with the most thorough and definitive and important information and facts.
Our goal is to give people a sense of their own power.
We win the fights other people say we can't, and we win fights against insurmountable odds.
Food and Water Watch has a consistent winning track record.
We're never going to have the money the oil and gas industry has. What we have is people power, and we've seen over and over and over again, when we organize locally, we win, and we win even against some of the biggest money that's out there in the political world.
It takes real people power to win, and that's what we're out here doing, building a movement.
While the challenges are enormous, they are not insurmountable, and there is still much to fight for.
By mobilizing and empowering communities and fostering grassroots leadership, I believe Food and Water Watch will help shape a world where environmental justice is not just a goal, but a reality.
Food and Water Watch. Fight like you live here.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Against All Odds. My name is Janine Sheffert. I am the Senior Manager of Philanthropy Events here at Food and Water Watch, and I will be your host this afternoon. We've got a great program ahead of us. Against All Odds is our annual benefit to protect our planet, and we're gathering together today in celebration of our 20th anniversary and to gear up for 20 more. Before we get started, I want to point out a couple of features for you. First, if you'd like to use closed captioning, you'll see the option in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, a little icon labeled CC. And if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're coming from, what brings you here, and what you're most excited about for this virtual conference. This chat is also where you can share your thoughts and reactions throughout the conference and get to know your fellow activists and attendees. We'll also be sharing resources in the chat throughout the event. In fact, right now we're dropping a link in the chat to a timeline we created in honor of our 20th anniversary. It is a great visual that shares some of our biggest victories in the last 2 decades of protecting our food, water, and climate. Before we get started with the program, I'd like to take a moment to thank our conference, our benefit host committee. This group of people played a large role in last week's New York City benefit reception, and we're so appreciative of the time and effort they have contributed to this entire 20th anniversary event. I also want to thank our incredibly generous contributors to this event. Food and Water Watch doesn't take any corporate money, so it is all of you who make our work possible. And in addition today to gathering to learn, celebrate, and inspire, we're also here to help build capacity so that we can keep taking on these critical fights. Thank you so much for your contribution. And I am excited to announce that in honor of our 20th anniversary, through the generosity of donors Madeline Glick, Nancy Hughes, the Menaki Foundation, and Dr. Alan and Karen Warren, every gift you make today will be matched dollar for dollar up to $30,000. So as you participate today, please consider making a gift to help us continue to take on these critical fights. We'll add a link to donate in the chat. As we've said, it is Food and Water Watch's 20th anniversary, and I am thrilled to be here today with all of you in celebration and in solidarity. We are living in scary times, but Food and Water Watch has been building grassroots power for 20 years, and we're not afraid of the big fights. We know, as I'm guessing all of you know, that in gathering together, we build power and we can make real change. That's why today I am excited to hear from leaders and changemakers like Senator Cory Booker, who recently spoke on the Senate floor for a record-breaking 25 hours, and Professor Zephyr Teachout, who specializes in democracy and antitrust law. I'm excited to hear from our youth panelists about their views on the future of activism, and my Food and Water Watch colleagues as they discuss the work we're doing right now to protect our food and water. There is momentum gathering. As Senator Cory Booker said on the Senate floor, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. So thank you to all of you for being here and for working to build that grassroots power. And now I am honored to introduce Food and Water Watch founder and executive director, Wenonah Hauter. We as an organization couldn't ask for a better leader as we navigate these challenging times. As an author, organizer, and strategist, she has decades of experience campaigning and writing about environmental issues. She has trained and mentored hundreds of organizers and activists, and she has worked to develop policy positions and field strategies to secure real wins that protect the health of our communities and our environment. Wenonah, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Janine. It's such a pleasure to be here. Now more than ever, we need to be with others of like mind, even if it's virtual. It's so important to take the time to be uplifted and restored. We all know we're in for the fight of our lives, and we need to make sure we're strong and resilient. So today, we're going to be confident and optimistic about the future. And I am hopeful. After his first 100 days, Trump is sinking in the polls, and Musk has become a pariah. Millions of people have taken to the streets in recent weeks. And here at Food and Water Watch, we can see the tide turning as large numbers of people raise their hand to get involved in pushing our ambitious state agendas and in holding members of Congress accountable. It's the swell of people power that really gives me hope. And when I reflect back on 20 years of Food and Water Watch, I do see the power of what we've built together. We started Food and Water Watch with just a dozen staff. We had a vision about inspiring large numbers of people to get into this fight to protect our most essential resources. We knew that building political power takes time and a well thought out strategy. When we first started, people told us we were taking on fights that no one could win. But we knew that step by step, we could call for bold action and take on big issues like fracking, water pollution, and factory farms. Today, we have 100 staff, 3,000 active volunteers, and 2 million supporters. Our organizers work hand in hand with Food and Water Watch's researchers, lawyers, and policy experts. For the past 2 decades, we've used a careful strategic analysis of the political landscape, our strengths, who our opponents are, and how and where we can make the greatest difference. We built political muscle by activating people to hold their leaders accountable. Our organizing model has proven to be successful. We banned fracking in New York, Maryland, California, and many communities around the country. We've stopped numerous dirty power plants, pipelines, and other polluting projects. We've passed restrictions on factory farms. We've blocked water privatization attempts in more than 3 dozen jurisdictions. We've won significant legal victories to protect our water from factory farms. But none of this work could have been possible without you, our supporters, our community. So today we're celebrating, but we know there is much more work ahead, and the stakes have never been higher. But I'm confident that we will continue to stand together and fight for the world we want, that we're going to be able to turn back the forces that we're up against who are trying to destroy our environment and people. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here today, for all you do, and for moving forward with us. And I am just really looking forward to today's sessions. And I'm so thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker, Zephyr Teachout. She is someone who's been a passionate advocate for democracy, economic justice, and the kind of dramatic change we need to see. Zephyr Teachout is a fierce leader in the movement for justice. As a law professor at Fordham University, she has trained a whole new generation of legal minds and focused on dismantling the systems that allow corporate power to dominate our democracy. Her book, Break 'em Up, offers a clear call to action for reclaiming democracy from monopolies, and her previous book, Corruption in America, exposes how corporate interests have corrupted our legal system. Zephyr's work goes way beyond the classroom, though. She served as senior counsel for economic justice in the New York Attorney General's office. There, she worked tirelessly to hold powerful corporations accountable. Her writings have appeared in the New York Times, The Nation, The Washington Post, and many other publications. And she's an outspoken advocate for policies that prioritize people over profits. Please join me in welcoming Zephyr Teachout.
I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about the concentration of power in America and how it is a direct cause of choices that we made in the 1970s. It is a direct cause of the current crisis, the significant democratic crisis we're living through. And I want to do something else, which is connected in very specific ways to how much monopoly power and concentrated corporate power has really stomped on our ability to have the kind of society that we want to have, a healthy one with clean air and clean water and meaningful connected communities, and really stomped on the green energy revolution that we should have had. So in the 1970s, there was a quiet but significant revolution, and it was a revolution of thought. It was a revolution in how we saw the world. And it was a revolution brought about by the Chicago School of Economics, by Robert Bork, Aaron Director, and other economists who had this idea that we should think about anti-monopoly law differently. For most of our country's history, going back to the revolution, we thought of anti-monopoly laws as those set of tools that protected democracy. The key tools, antitrust, rules around what became known as utilities, rules against abusive business behavior, as protecting not just our economy, but economic freedom, and not just economic freedom, but democratic freedom. Some of the great historians of the revolutionary period talked about it as a revolution against the spirit of monopoly that people saw growing in England. And Thomas Jefferson, in the same letter that he first suggested the First Amendment and the right to free speech, suggested that we have an anti-monopoly clause in the Constitution. We ultimately didn't have that because the assumption was it's obvious. We don't need that. So that's the background. And it's push and pull for 140 years. It's not a single story, but there's a push and pull between concentrated power and decentralized power back and forth. And everybody understands that the fight about monopoly power is a fight about democracy. So when the Chicago School economists came along in the 70s, backed by big corporate interests, the revolution they proposed is that we take something large and expansive and democracy protecting and turn it into something small and weak. They said all anti-monopoly law is antitrust, and all antitrust law is just about consumer prices. I'm not going to go too deep into the nature of the economic arguments, but this argument then gets taken up first by Ronald Reagan and then by every president, Democrat and Republican, from Reagan until Biden. And we see a significant change. Starting in 1980, a massive drop just in the enforcement actions brought by the Federal Trade Commission. But it's not just about the Trade Commission. It's about a way of seeing the economy and the world. And as a result of this revolution, we have had over 500,000 mergers in the United States alone. Think about that. When I say revolution, I mean a total restructuring, destabilization of the nature of the economy. And those mergers are piling up power in vertically strong corporations. These aren't just the tiny mergers, although there's plenty of those. And some of them you may know of, the roll-ups, the more recent roll-ups by private equity of nursing homes, which has led to greater sickness and worse nurse pay. But we're also talking about these mergers between giants like Bayer Monsanto, very recent one that we let through. So what is the world that we now live in because of this revolution? 4 companies control 80% of beef processing. 3 companies dominate the insulin market. GM, Ford, Stellantis, now Tesla, dominate automobiles. 4 airlines control the vast majority of domestic flights. And you can go into area after area and find this radical concentration, whether you're talking about seeds or office supplies. Everywhere industry has gotten concentrated. And of course, the key thing for us to understand is this was not inevitable. It was a specific political project to revolutionize the negative kind of revolution, to be clear, to revolutionize a democratic society with broadly shared economic power to a much more centralized and authoritarian one. And when we were talking about anti-monopoly 10 years ago, it may have felt a little extreme to talk about the authoritarian tendency in concentrated power. But as we face this moment today, with Donald Trump surrounded by tech oligarchs like Elon Musk and others, the authoritarian core of concentrated power is shining through. So how does this apply to climate? I mean, I think you can already see many of the ways just by thinking about the nature of concentrated power in which it has a direct application. But let's walk through it. Because I actually do think there has been a weakness in the climate movement. Food and Water Watch has been one of the few organizations that have really focused on corporate power. A lot of climate activism has focused on policies and not focusing on who holds power. So even the model of thinking about accountability work, like corporate accountability work, climate accountability work, presumes the core legitimacy of highly concentrated power and then kind of begs that power to change. When you bring an anti-monopoly framework, an antitrust framework, you say, we need to actually change who is holding power. Because if you change the policy for a brief moment without changing who holds power, then the policies are going to get diluted or overturned if they don't serve the capital interests of the big monopolies. And right now we have a significant power problem in climate. Big oil, big auto, and big tech are sitting as the bottlenecks on top of the economy, deciding what gets built, what ideas get buried, what kind of energy we use, and whose voices are heard. So I think, and we'll get to this, that I think we do need to really shift our thinking around climate activism and focus on green populism, a movement focused on breaking corporate power and building on the work that Food and Water Watch does. So let's go way back to talk about specific moments where we have seen real concentrated power really suppressing the future, making the green energy future impossible. In the 1930s and 1940s, Standard Oil, Firestone, and GM got together and colluded to buy up and break the electric city car, I'm using the wrong word, the electric buses, basically, the electric transit model in cities across the United States. This was investigated as a criminal antitrust violation. And frankly, they got a slap on the wrist. But when we look at our cities today and see how car heavy they are and how much they are focused on the automobile as opposed to public electric transit, that is an 80-year-old anti-monopoly story. Now let's look at some more recent examples. Probably many of you have seen the movie about the killing of the electric car, but if you haven't, in the late 90s, General Motors developed an incredible electric vehicle that people love. Tom Hanks was excited about it. The celebrities were in on it. There was a lot of excitement around a new 1990s. Now we're talking more than 35 years ago. Excitement around electric vehicles. But the leadership was worried that electric vehicles would cannibalize their own profitable gas guzzling sales. They thought that if they expanded into EV, they would lose control. So much of monopoly is about control. It's top down over the fuel and repair markets. So GM repossessed the electric vehicles, turned them into scrap metal. And at the same time, you have Chevron buying these critical battery patents, which are so important for electric vehicles, and burying them, refusing to license them to automakers. So the future of clean transport is deliberately buried. And even today, you see these same big oil companies lobbying against a stronger fuel economy standards, suing California for trying to set its own rules. And we may know this, this story, but I want to make sure that we see it through an anti-monopoly lens. Because the way in which GM was able to crush the future and the way in which Chevron was able to crush the future is by using their existing market dominance and then leveraging that to engage in a conduct that protected the moat of their power. These are exactly the kind of behaviors that a strong anti-monopoly movement does not allow. But in the 1990s, when this was happening, we had the weakest of the weak anti-monopoly movements. We were left with this thin, narrow vision offered by the 1970s Chicago School economists, which is that we shouldn't interfere with business decisions unless they clearly and directly affect consumer prices. So things that in retrospect clearly look like antitrust violations were just waved by. There are other things that we saw happening in the 1990s. These may be more widely recognized. The role of, I think everybody here knows about it, the role of ExxonMobil funding scientists to publish studies. I want to ask you to think about that also through the anti-monopoly lens. Think about the different oil companies coming together and what looks like a shared strategy to deceive the public. The more you allow concentrated power, the more you allow this kind of deception to happen. Because if you have a healthy, decentralized market, then you have dissenters who can speak up and know it's worthwhile to speak up, and they won't be crushed by this concentrated machine. There are other examples that are far more recent, close to home. Once Big Oil had established this level of concentrated power, they were able to basically avoid all responsibility for the pricing decisions they made. So after COVID, and especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you saw massive spikes in big oil profits. I think ExxonMobil had over 55 billion in profits in 2022. Chevron is making over 35 billion. And these massive profits are coming from price gouging. And I use that term advisedly. I am a student of price gouging. I worked on price gouging cases. And so I want to be very precise about what I mean by price gouging. Under most states' laws, and most states have price gouging laws, you cannot use a significant market shock to increase prices a significant amount unless the costs of producing that product also increase. But what happened in the wake of the double shocks, the COVID and Russian invasion of Ukraine shock, is that the costs increased somewhat for the big oil companies, but their prices shot up way above how much their costs were going up. So they're just making profits even though their own costs aren't going up. Reaching big oil price gouging is very difficult. your local gas station knows that price gouging law backwards and forward and is quite determined. Every time their costs go up, their gas prices raise, but they're going to keep their prices and costs within the same relationship with same relationship to each other throughout market shock. So gas station, market shock, costs go way up, price go way up, but they're not going up here, except in a handful of gas stations. The local mom and pop shop is following that price gouging rule. Well, ExxonMobil and Chevron are able to take advantage of the same shock's coming along, cost goes up, and their price goes way up here because they are sitting in a powerful position where they can charge that much. And of course, it's the people of the country that get hurt. Now, you may, being in the climate movement, think, well, people should be paying more for gas. So what if they paid more for gas? But I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think a really important way to think about it is to say they are violating a core premise of American law, the anti-price gouging laws, even though it doesn't reach these big guys. It reaches all the little guys, everybody's already covered. And because they were able to take advantage of that what I think of as the sort of big corporation loophole, or the upstream loophole, the farther you are upstream loophole, they pulled back on their green energy commitments. It no longer made sense to them financially to invest in what did make sense when they weren't making these gross profits. So had they actually followed the price gouging, the logic of the price gouging law in state after state, those profits would have been far smaller. They would be far more likely to have made those green energy investments. I know it's a slightly complicated sequence, but it's important to understand because I think of price gouging as basically poor man's antitrust. You see these massive exploitations of market power during a shock only when there are massive instances of market power. If you actually have a decentralized economy, you can't take advantage because one of your other competitors is going to underprice you. And so price gouging law, the price gouging principle, comes out of a concern about unfair exploitation of power, and we have allowed unfair concentrations of power. Ag, as we know, is far more than green energy. But before I move on to, climate, as we know, is far more than green energy. But before I move on to talking about climate and ag, where there's just a radical concentration of power that is also stomping on the green energy revolution, I just wanted you to think about what might have been. So what might have been if in the 1970s, instead of adopting that model, we'd had an FDR presidency, Democrats, Republicans, who took up the mantle of anti-monopoly law and made sure that no company ever got so big that could fundamentally dictate prices and dictate wages. We'd have a far more equal economy. Evidence suggests that it's tens of thousands of dollars a year that workers lose because of concentrated labor markets. We'd have a far more innovative economy. We'd have a far more decentralized economy where you could get a job in Utica, New York, where there wasn't such concentration of industry in a few coastal cities. And we'd have a profusion of innovative green energy. So that brings me to ag, where the stomping on the future is happening all the time. The seed monopolies. We have Bayer and Monsanto that control a third of the global seed market, and we allowed that merger to go through. And after we allowed that merger to go through, Bayer doubled down on these patent-protected seeds requiring heavy pesticide use, locking farmers into chemical-intensive farming. This is a command and control economy for a lot of farmers. And what we're doing is shutting down their capacity to innovate with their deep understanding of soil and nature and weather. You see in the fertilizer economy, a handful of Nutrien, CF, and Mosaic dominating, and they want fossil fuel-based synthetic fertilizer. Regenerative practices drastically reduce emissions, but the monopoly wants to lock in the farmers so they don't even try new options. I mentioned the meatpacking monopolies before. And you see these big concentrated powers directly suppressing the ability of farmers to engage in regenerative agriculture, and then indirectly doing that too, with massive lobbying campaigns against soil health initiatives and farm to market reforms. Now, the good news is that in 2020, the Democratic Party, for the first time since 1980, well, I should say Joe Biden, because there's a real fight within the Democratic Party about this. Joe Biden, for the first time since 1980, embraced anti-monopoly law. He actually gave an amazing speech. I talked to some farmers who said they wept when they saw this speech. It was early on, I think it was 1 year into his presidency, and he gave a speech saying that the experiment that we tried since 1980 in antitrust failed. Not just we did some things wrong, could have done it better. Failure. And he talked about how much it had suppressed innovation and how much it had suppressed workers' wages. And he appointed Lina Khan to be the chair of the Federal Trade Commission. Jonathan Kanter became the chief antitrust enforcer for the Department of Justice. And along with Rohit Chopra at the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau and Tim Wu at the White House, there was a significant new shift in energy and a return to anti-monopolies roots. The laws that had sort of sat on the books as unenforced laws became live tools to protect democracy again. Kanter brought several important cases against collusion in the chicken industry. Lina Khan at the FTC with her commissioners brought a critical case against price fixing in the oil industry. And they also just changed our sense of dynamism around what could be possible in anti-monopoly and reinserted the understanding that anti-monopoly is a core democratic concern. It was so controversial that the big money powers within the Democratic Party lobbied hard to make sure that Kamala Harris didn't mention Lina Khan's name. And they were publicly lobbying, saying that if Kamala Harris was elected, she should find somebody else other than Khan and go back to the old ways. If you want to know how powerful Lina Khan was, just ask the Wall Street Journal. They wrote a negative op-ed about her every 11 to 13 days. I know there were over 100 negative op-eds about Lina Khan. So it truly ruffled the feathers of finance. Even though it's good for bottom-up business, for the real innovator, it was bad for those financiers who make their money off of moats of power. Obviously, Harris didn't win. And right now, Donald Trump is working to destroy the Federal Trade Commission. He illegally has tried to fire 2 commissioners. The moment we're in, which I alluded to at the beginning, where we have this radical concentration of power, is, of course, anathema to the anti-monopoly movement. So what do we do in this moment? Well, I think what we need to do is, one, start seeing through the lens of power and start really, especially as people who care deeply about climate, food, getting deep into the weeds in a way that Food and Water Watch has done so well, did very recently with a brilliant report on the price of eggs. That's a monopoly problem, not a bird flu problem. Wonderful report on that, is to get into the real mechanics of how things work. Like, real politics involves knowing what a supply chain is and how those supply chains work and where there's choke points in their supply chains. We need a new green populism where we stand shoulder to shoulder with people who are getting crushed by their energy bills to break up the power of big oil. That's not just about vertical or horizontal breakups, but it's also stopping their ability to control in a vertical way the entire process from wells to pump. We've got to democratize energy, building out that community-owned solar, creating publicly owned local grids, and doing so in the name of democracy with that anti-monopoly spirit. We've got to break up big tech. And I mean, break up in every way, break up their power. There's a Google trial going on right now about Google has now 3 times been called a monopoly. We've got to make sure that we actually break up Google's ability to dominate our future, because big tech is a big driver of climate harms right now as they're trying to build out their data centers and pushing for, their vision is pretty explicitly a corporate controlled green economy, but that's an oxymoron. Because once you have the corporate control, you will not have the values of communities, of workers, parents, front and center. And we've got to rebuild trade policy. This is, Trump's tariffs are a true disaster for our country. The amount of suffering that is already happening is a disaster. The amount of downsizing that is happening now, the loss to farmland that has been cared for generation, but farmers are just living right on the edge. And this is a indefensible negative shock to the system. But our counter isn't a kind of tariff abolitionism that you see so often as the counter to Trump. The counter is actually recognizing the ways in which trade deals and the centralization of power and control, the removal of decision-making power through trade deals, the loss of support for truly local energy systems and local farm systems, that we need a counter that involves local, resilient, vibrant community in America, not just the Scylla and Charybdis of Donald Trump and ultra-globalization. Our new and green populism is going to build us new and different allies. It's small businesses, workers, farmers who want fair prices and energy independence. And it's going to be centered around who holds power to decide our future. Today, we are getting crushed by a handful of monopolies. And we've got to shift our thinking just from trying to get the monopolies to behave better to make sure they do not govern us in the future. The fight for the climate is the fight for democracy itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zephyr. What a great lesson in the concentration of industry and its deliberate negative effects. I appreciate the time you've taken with us today and everything you're doing to fight for an anti-monopoly future. It is truly an honor.
Well, it's really exciting to be working with you because you have deep roots in anti-monopoly. You're not just adding it to the top, but an understanding that power, that fighting power, is necessary for our democracy and for our climate. And I got to tell you, Food and Water Watch is one of the few organizations that really understands that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Zephyr. We will be taking a very short break, and then we will be right back to hear from Senator Cory Booker.
Hi, everyone. I'm Seneca Warren, a proud member of Food and Water Watch. It is my honor to introduce our next speaker, U.S. Senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker. Senator Booker has been a tireless champion for safe food, clean water, and a livable future. He's been a steadfast ally to Food and Water Watch, and just recently, he made history with the longest speech ever delivered on the Senate floor, electrifying our movement and reminding us what bold leadership looks like. Today, Senator Booker will speak about the urgent need to fight back against the rollbacks on environmental protections, confront the devastating impacts of factory farms, and take on the corporate monopolies that are squeezing our farmers and threatening the future of food. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Senator Cory Booker.
Hello, I'm honored to be addressing this audience of change makers at Food and Water Watch's 20th anniversary conference. 20 years of such vital advocacy is a true accomplishment. In that time, we've all made real progress together. With your support, Congress in 2022 passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in climate change mitigation and adaptation in American history. But we still have a big fight on our hands to protect the IRA from what we're seeing as an onslaught of attacks by the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress. I know that everyone listening is acutely aware of the challenges our nation now faces. President Trump is not just a threat to democracy, but also to American safety and security. He has already started rolling back clean water and clean air protections. He is canceling a rule that would have limited how much PFAS, which are these dangerous forever chemicals, as you know, linked to cancer and birth defects, how much of them can be put into our water. He's rolling back limits on mercury, coal ash, car exhaust, and oil and gas waste. Lives are literally at stake as he's doubling down on our broken, consolidated factory farming system. The top 4 largest pork packers have now seized control of 70% of the market, up from 33% 40 years ago. In the same time period, the top 4 beef packers have expanded their market share from 25% to 85%. This consolidation has been especially devastating to rural communities, where these large multinational corporations have externalized their costs and privatized their profits. A phenomenon I witnessed firsthand when I traveled to Duplin County, North Carolina, a few years after my election to the Senate. In Duplin County, I met with local residents whose lives were devastatingly affected every day by these factory farms. Factory farms look nothing like the bucolic images people have when they think of a farm. Instead, they are metal sheds the length of football fields in which thousands of animals are crammed in. You can smell them even before they come into view due to the massive manure lagoons that are the size of city blocks. I saw this waste being sprayed from those lagoons onto adjoining fields. Nearby residents described to me the litany of problems this would cause for them, how the waste would leach into the groundwater or drift like mist into their backyards, forcing people to shelter in their homes, preventing them from gardening, from enjoying a cookout, or even hanging their clothes out to dry. And these neighbors of these factory farms told me about their increased rates of respiratory infections and cancers, these things that their families were suffering because of these environmental harms. These factory farms are not just polluting rural America, but they are driving out actual family farmers, which are being told to either get big or get out. Net farm income for U.S. farmers has seen record declines in recent years, forcing many farmers to declare bankruptcy or rely on multiple jobs off their farms. Now, this is not by accident. Big Ag has been funneling money into Washington for decades to influence policy that benefits them and hurts independent family farmers. We now spend the vast majority of our farm safety net on corn and soy that goes into fuel tanks, animal feed, and ultra-processed foods. Meanwhile, Even though our federal dietary guidelines tell us that 50% or more of our diet should consist of fruits and vegetables, less than 10% of federal Farm Bill incentives go to the farmers growing these healthy foods. Instead of trying to fix this warped subsidy system, Trump's USDA chose to cut $1 billion from local food programs that were actually supporting family farmers who were providing fresh fruits and vegetables to schools and food banks. But we are not going to just curse the darkness. We're going to try to shed some light. We have solutions. On this Food and Water Watch 20th anniversary, I want to look ahead to the next decade of what we need to do together to ensure that everyone has clean water, clean food, clean land, a livable climate. I believe this is not just our calling, this is our American destiny. If we stand strong, continue the fight, don't give up. Like generations past in the civil rights movement said, we may be facing great challenges, but together we shall overcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Cory Booker. Next up, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Meghan Davis, Associate Professor and Doctoral Program Director in Environmental Health and Engineering at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Today, Meghan is going to join us from the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future to give us a public health perspective on avian influenza in livestock. Meghan, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, I'm Dr. Meghan Davis. I'm an associate professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering, and also affiliated with the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. But I'm also here today because I'm a veterinarian and started my practice career with dairy cows. And so what I'm going to talk about today is the H5N1 avian influenza outbreak currently happening in the United States, involving many different species of livestock, including dairy cows. And what I'm going to present is a public health perspective. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement, given that many of us, no matter where we are on the traditional and contemporary homelands of Indigenous people. Briefly, I'm going to start by talking about a subject near and dear to my heart, which is One Health, and provide some principles that help us understand better what's happening with H5N1 avian influenza. And then I'll go through a brief history and then some of the things that we're seeing in workers and some opportunities we have to move forward. I just want to acknowledge that some of this work derives from work that I've done with the national academies, involving both spillover prevention and also H5N1 research readiness. Let's start with some basic principles of One Health. And the first is systems thinking. Now, you may have heard of systems thinking before, but just to have a quick primer for everyone, systems thinking really is about looking at systems in their full complexity, at acknowledging the feedback loops and the dynamism, how things shift over time. This is in contrast to what we tend to do in science, which is more reductionist, where we're trying to isolate very complex things down to maybe a single unit or just one relation between two different things. Both of these are very important to science. It's just that in One Health, we tend to lean more towards systems thinking. These holistic approaches really help us understand the core of One Health, which is where we bring human health, animal health, and environmental health together. So it's that Venn diagram overlap. And increasingly, for the environmental health dimension, we've been thinking about the built environment and things like plant or ecosystem health as maybe separate entities. Another key characteristic of One Health approaches is partner group engagement. And this really can be very participatory. It can really be valuing of Indigenous knowledge and is very important in terms of transdisciplinary work. So that's work where you have people from different backgrounds who come together to work on a problem at the same time. That is, working together to co-design and implement whatever policy or perhaps research study might be necessary to better understand what's happening. And when I think about partner group engagement, I also want to call out another veterinarian, one of my students, Dr. Ari Tagami, who together with me was working with the national academies on spillover prevention. And we really were thinking very deeply about how you operationalize partner group engagement. So thinking of this in terms of not just listening sessions, but improvement of bidirectional communication and thinking about co-design of the process as well as whatever the program or research study might be. And when I say bidirectional communication, this often can be in the context of risk communication, where we're trying to understand the hazard and doing messaging to help with the mitigation. Within a One Health context at the global level, we think about the quadripartite. These are the global agencies that are really engaged in responses to things like spillover events and global pandemics. So this includes the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Organization for Animal Health, which was formerly OIE, is now WOA, as well as the United Nations Environment Program. And they then communicate with the various national agencies or ministries, who then communicate with the subnational agencies or ministries. And so in the United States, this means that the state government is highly involved in a lot of these efforts. And I'll talk a little bit about this in the context of H5N1. And I think what's really important to recognize is that there are frontline workers and organizations, perhaps some of you are involved in this, who really are the intermediaries between some of these state-level agencies and the community or public. You may be involved, as I am, on kind of the outside, right? So in our ivory tower of academia, we might be developing best practices or policies and procedures, or stepping back to take a bigger picture look of what's happening. So let's get into H5N1. H5N1 is highly pathogenic avian influenza. You'll see it abbreviated HPAI, or it might be called high path. This is in contrast to low path, or low pathogenicity avian influenza. When we say this, we're referring to how devastating it is in poultry. So you really see very high mortality rates within domestic chickens, turkeys, and other birds. Influenza viruses are assigned different numbers based on the neuraminidase and hemagglutinin. But what you really need to know in terms of the taxonomy is just that there are different groups. So you might have these larger types and then all the way down to different genotypes or variants that may behave differently from each other. So when we say H5N1, we're merely referring to a zoonotic strain. The reservoir host, that is where this virus tends to hang out, is in waterfowl, like ducks and geese. And the targets, the ones that we've always been worried about, are these domestic poultry, right? The broiler chickens for meat, the layer chickens for eggs, and turkeys. But what we've seen with this particular virus is that it can get into mammals and sporadically will cause disease in people. If we think about the global epizootic of H5N1, and epizootic is just a fancy term for a pandemic in animals, what we've been dealing with is a particular clade of H5N1, 2344B, and there have been a number of genotypes within this clade. It is an influenza A, like seasonal flu is an influenza A, but it behaves a bit differently and tends not to infect humans as well as seasonal influenza infects humans. It's been really impacting a lot of different kinds of birds. So not just our domestic poultry, but also wild bird populations have been having major die-offs. And a big concern is that really the scale and persistence of this have been unprecedented. The last major outbreak of high path was in 2014, 2015. And so that lasted, a couple of seasons and then it went away. But this has been going on since 2020 globally. In mammals, it's had a number of different spillover events, and we've seen of concern mammal-to-mammal spread, particularly in farmed mink and among marine mammals, particularly sea lions. You may remember that there was a big outbreak in South America just a number of years ago. Other mammal species can be affected, and of course, a big concern for me are cats, because this can include both the cats that we see in zoos, as well as our domestic house cats, and they can get very, very sick from this. Dogs are technically susceptible, but we have not seen the disease in them that we might expect to see based on their susceptibility. We've also seen that there have been other species. Red foxes are really impacted. We've even had a polar bear and a squirrel reported. In North America, this really began in very late 2021 in Canada, and then in early 2022, we had our first detections in the United States. And these have been in all the species you would expect, but also last spring in species we did not expect, dairy cows. What's been happening in dairy cows is really unusual. Yes, we'd seen a little bit of influenza in dairy cows before, and I think there are some reports back from the 1950s that suggested maybe this virus could infect the mammary gland. But to see it emerge where really the udder and the milk are the most affected thing that we see in dairy cows is highly unusual, and it's been spreading cow to cow in ways that are concerning. We've seen it spread into a number of different states. It started in the Texas Panhandle, and then through cow movement ended up in other states. We've also seen that it's been spreading maybe through the milking parlor itself from one cow to the next, but also from one farm to the other through different pathways. What we've seen in terms of the total devastation of livestock in the United States is quite extreme. These are USDA data on high path in commercial poultry flocks. So you see that there are over 780 flocks across the totality of the outbreak, and there are some states that are particularly affected. We've also seen that backyard flocks have been impacted, and there have been over 900 of these. Really, the numbers may be somewhat similar between the backyard flocks and the commercial flocks in terms of the number impacted that we've documented. But the scale on the industrial side is, of course, much larger. If you have an introduction to a backyard flock, you will have that small flock affected and maybe some in the vicinity. But when you have a large industrial facility affected, then you can have upwards of 1, 2, or even 3 million birds affected at a time. The control measures for the commercial poultry are to do stamping out. And so this is in part because of the animal welfare issues. These birds get very sick and have high mortality rates. If we look at the surveillance in wild birds, remembering that the waterfowl are the reservoir species, but that other birds, including raptors, can be impacted, you'll see that it really has affected all 50 U.S. states. And the spillovers into mammals have been a real concern. So on this map of avian influenza in mammals, you can see that even if you can't read the legend, there are quite a few different glyphs, right? There are many different species that have been impacted. And domestic cats, you'll see across many, many different states, in part because they've been exposed not just through indoor-outdoor behaviors and wild bird hunting, but also through consuming raw milk and raw meat pet foods. And these may be distributed direct to consumer in a national way. In dairy cows, really, we started confirming this in March of last year. And a number of different states, we now have 17 states that have been affected. We've also seen that there have been over 1,000 herds, and the vast majority of these have been in California, which is the #1 dairy state in the country. In cows, it doesn't cause the same kind of disease that you see in the poultry. The cows may be a little bit what I would call in practice ADR. They ain't doing right. So they're a little bit lethargic. They have a reduction in their milk production. They may have clinical signs of mastitis. So the milk is kind of, cheesy, colored, thick. And the cows can transmit, as I said, sometimes through the actual, milking parlor from moving the claws from one cow to the next, or maybe through some of their social behaviors. If we think about how this might have happened in the first place, really understanding the engineering of the dairy farms can be very helpful. There are a couple different styles on this picture. So we've got free stalls on the left and the right, and in the middle you have more of a stanchion barn. But in all cases, you see that there is a lot of ventilation and a lot of access that birds or even rodents could have to get into these spaces. And we have seen that rodents on farms have turned up positive. So we don't know yet what role that they may play in terms of the disease ecology. A USDA study showed that not just cow movement, but also sharing equipment or sharing workers could be risk factors for the spread, and geographic proximity was implicated. There have been some studies out of Europe that have suggested the potential for airborne spread from one farm to the next, a so-called plume effect. Now, that was seen in ducks and poultry. Whether it's true for dairy, we don't yet know. Other animals affected on the farm can include the feral cats living there, and as I said before, the mice. We've also seen it get into pigs, at least one in Oregon that was on a small, non-commercial, mixed species facility. But one of our biggest concerns is if this would get into domestic pigs in the United States. Now, the biosecurity and biocontainment on hog farms is a bit different than on dairy farms, for sure. And there's been a big move within the industries, especially after the 2009 swine flu pandemic, for there to be increased attention to, for example, showering in and showering out for workers. A number of workers have been really the ones who've been most impacted by H5N1. We've had 70 people in the United States confirmed, and then a number of other people within the Americas that have been ill. We've had at least 2 deaths, one a person in Louisiana who had backyard poultry, and the other a girl in Mexico who had no known risk factors that we're aware of. We've also seen that there's been at least one poultry worker who's been hospitalized. But other than that, are predominantly dairy and poultry workers who have been shown to be positive, have had much more mild symptoms, which is a good news, right? Because we're not seeing that they're ending up in the hospital at the same rates. But of course, concerning that we have this much exposure, that we have so many workers who've been affected. For the dairy workers, it's been predominantly conjunctivitis, so red eyes, and a little bit of respiratory symptoms. And poultry has had a little bit more in terms of respiratory symptoms. And this makes sense when you think about the way workers are exposed. So here we have a dairy worker who's putting the claws on the udder to milk a cow. And you can imagine that there can be sprayed milk. You might get milk on your hands. And milk is, of course, the most infectious thing coming out of the cow. In fact, you can have a cow who's positive and you can test her milk and find lots and lots of virus. But if you test her nose, she might even be negative. So this means it's really difficult for us to do surveillance of cows through nasal swabbing, which is, of course, the way we tend to do it for ourselves, right, for humans. So we've really needed to rely upon bulk milk tank testing to do surveillance in the dairy cows. Poultry workers are exposed a little bit differently. So the way we see the shedding in the poultry is through the feces, and then this gets attached to dust, right, particulate matter. And when the birds flap their wings, it kicks it up into the air, and that's how the workers tend to get exposed through the respiratory tract. And this is true for both large commercial scale poultry workers as well as backyard flock owners. In fact, there was an implication that high ventilation use in Colorado at a couple of facilities that needed to be culled was really implicated in the exposure of poultry workers, given that this was done during a very high heat wave. And this meant that they had to really turn the ventilation on at full bore. This may have interrupted the personal protective equipment, the masks that the workers were wearing might have gotten jiggled by the high volume of air needed for that ventilation. These workers are really a vulnerable population. A lot of them are from, migrant or immigrant communities. They may not even speak Spanish. They could speak indigenous languages like Quiche. And they may distrust authorities, particularly these days. And so it can be very difficult to access the worker population. So some of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of the need to conduct surveillance in this population, as well as really try to work on provision of personal protective equipment and really education on ways that they can protect themselves really relies upon existing relationships and champions, right? What partner organizations are already working with the communities, and how can we use that to help with the bidirectional communication? Understanding from their perspective what's happening and what is valuable to them, and then trying to make sure they have access to what they need for worker protection. When we think about interventions, I like to lean back on my occupational health training. And I'd like to give a shout out to another veterinarian and student of mine, Dr. Catherine Dalton, who helped me think about the hierarchy of controls. That is, which things we do that are considered to be more effective versus less effective within an occupational workforce. And thinking about this from an infectious disease perspective will suggest that, if you rely on people to wear PPE, and that is the masks, the gloves, the fluid-resistant coveralls, that Tyvek that makes you super hot if you're working in the summertime. And I've certainly, given up my share of sweat when I've worn Tyvek onto farms in the past. There are a lot of barriers to that. And so that is considered to be less effective. So I think what we need to start thinking about are, how can we work differently? How can we farm differently? What other kinds of engineering controls are available? And are there ways that we can try to eliminate the susceptibility of the people who are working through vaccination? And so if we focus on production facilities, then yes, if we can deploy vaccines either in the workforce or the animals or both, that may be a way to help with the control. Is this an opportunity to think about redesigning those dairy farms? Right? They're open to air, and there may be very few ways that with the existing structures, we can keep birds out or rodents out. So if we're going to redesign, are there opportunities to build them better, right? To think about ways in which we can, either through geographic location, put them in places that are less concerning from both a spillover perspective and also from a community perspective. Can we think about ways that we can re-engineer dairy parlors so that they are maybe better places to work as well as good for animal health? And then are there ways that we can give workers autonomy? Can we give them access to over-the-counter testing or point-of-care testing that would be specific to H5 and allow them to make decisions about their own risk and the risk of take-home exposures to their families and their pets? There are barriers to vaccination that I need to acknowledge. These are not really so much on the technical side. They are far more on the trade side. So there is a need to differentiate infected from vaccinated animals. And so testing needs to take that into consideration. But there also may be a requirement for countries to have disease-free status. And so really the restrictions here are within those trade agreements, not necessarily within the ability to scale up or deliver a vaccine. We do have a vaccine candidate available for humans, and there is a vaccine that's been developed for poultry that is specific to this clade of H5N1. But let's focus for a moment on participatory approaches and communication. This schematic that you don't need to look at too closely is really just about surveillance systems and how we think about the ways that different aspects of our governmental structures should respond and really be actively engaged to try to understand where the virus is and what to do about it. But I'd like to zoom in on the need to have participatory approaches baked into this, and for these to involve not just our community partners, but also researchers, policymakers, and other organizations that are really critical partners here. And that includes, I think, a lot of you. So when we think about our communication process, what we recognize is that there tend to be silos between these different dimensions, the human health, the animal health, and the environmental side, whether that's on the ecosystem side or on environmental health side. And so really breaking down those silos and improving communication across different levels and among these different types of groups is essential. We also may need to engage people who have traditionally maybe not been part of these processes in the past. And so I think about animal control personnel who takes care of feral cats, right? And all of these may tie back onto the need to prevent movement between farms and from farms into local communities. And so really trying to improve that bidirectional communication and understanding what's going on at the ground level is absolutely essential. There are many emerging challenges. At the moment, we don't see human-to-human transmission, and if that would occur, that would be a big red flag in terms of a step towards a pandemic. But we have seen that raw milk products are a way that this can be transmitted, and certainly, if we think of the workers who are exposed, we recognize that they are, on average, healthier than the public. But the people who drink raw milk may include those who may have other diseases and therefore may be susceptible in different ways. I've mentioned that cats have been affected, and that's a big concern too, especially because the way we live and interact with our pets is quite different than we might interact with a cow at work. We also have seen, as I said, the concerns with a potential rodent involvement and really needing to understand to what degree we need to be addressing that potential disease ecology. And then I, of course, think also about not just worker health, but well-being. And this is a major stressor for workers that they have to deal with the cows that are sick, the poultry that need to be culled, as well as just the potential stressors of their own exposure. My students remind me all the time that when you're operationalizing One Health or any holistic approach, that you tend to focus on that area of overlap. But the places where you don't overlap tend to be places where you lack shared responsibility to make change. And so trying to not just understand that area of overlap, but make it bigger so that we can have shared responsibility to address challenges like these is absolutely essential. Thank you so much for your time. I'm available by email to chat further, mdavis65@jhu.edu. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meghan Davis, for that great overview of the One Health holistic approach to looking at the current avian influenza outbreak and opportunities to move forward with shared responsibility in the future. And as Meghan has so graciously offered her email address, we will put that in the chat as well. So if you'd like to reach out to her via email, check out her address there in the chat. Thank you again, Meghan. We are going to take a very short break. And as we do, I want to remind you of the match that we have going today, thanks to our generous sponsors. It is getting exciting to see us climb closer to that $30,000 match. So thank you all so much for your generosity. We will be back very shortly, and we'll see you in just a minute for our next conference session, How We Develop Winning Strategies. Our next conference session is titled How We Develop Winning Strategies. We've been talking this afternoon about the fact that we have had 20 years of building grassroots power and 20 years of wins. This is a fact that we are proud of, but those wins don't just fall from the sky. We don't win because we believe something strongly or even because we are right. We win because of the strategic work we do. And here to tell us more about that strategy is Thomas Meyer, Food and Water Watch's Strategic Projects Organizing Director. Thomas works with organizers, volunteers, and coalition partners across the country to develop campaign strategies and build grassroots power. He has played a major role in multiple successes for Food and Water Watch campaigns, including stopping dirty energy legislation in Congress and organizing the March to End Fossil Fuels. Thomas was previously the senior Maryland organizer, where he led Food and Water Watch to a landmark victory with a successful campaign to ban fracking statewide. Prior to joining Food and Water Watch in 2015, Thomas attended American University, where he organized a fossil fuel divestment campaign and earned a bachelor's degree in international studies. Thomas, thanks so much for being here with us today. I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks so much, Janine. Very nice intro. So as Janine said, as part of all of our campaigns, Food and Water Watch works with thousands of people and other organizations to protect our food, water, and climate. My colleagues and I work with amazing volunteers all over the country who dedicate their time and energy to fighting for a better world. And we work alongside other organizations whose mission aligns with Food and Water Watch. As part of our campaigns, we use an approach that we refer to as strategic organizing. And I'll just run through kind of a summary of that. There are 3 principles of strategic organizing that we ground all of our campaigns in. The first one is to win real concrete improvements in people's lives. We're trying to change the material conditions, making people's food and water safer and cleaner, improving our climate, making our communities safer, make the economy work for everyone. As we do this, we want to make people aware of their collective power. And we do this in a variety of ways through training and popular education, but by also involving people in the victories that we have so that they have a sense that they can change the outcome and improve the conditions of their own lives. And finally, we want to be changing the relations of power between people and their government and other institutions. So we do this by building strong organizations like Food and Water Watch, but also like our allies, both all at the local, state, and the national level. We also do this by changing laws and regulations that both improve people's lives materially and change the relationship between people, government, and other institutions. There are 3 kind of components to all of our campaigns. And the first one is a really clear goal. So often that is either to pass a good policy or to stop a bad policy. But generally, we're trying to influence the decision or the position of specific decision makers. So that could be a city council member, that could be the governor, that could be the member of Congress, that could be the president. We're trying to change the decisions that these people make to, again, improve people's lives in a material way. So we always start with a clear goal. Then we've got to have the strategy. The strategy is our plan for how we can win the campaign. This always involves and really requires involving large numbers of people in the campaign. And so we assess how to do this by asking ourselves and trying to answer some key questions. What do the people in the area that we're working really care about? How are they impacted by the problem? How will we reach them? How are they already organized? This is always different depending on the specifics of the campaign, the specifics of the problem, the geographic area that we're working on. So there's lots of questions that we have to answer that go into developing a strategy. The other thing that's different for each strategy and each campaign is who the decision maker is. And just like the questions we have to answer about the people that we're trying to organize and the people that we're trying to involve in the campaign, we have to answer a lot of questions too about the decision maker. So who are their voters? Who are their supporters? What are the issues or the geographic areas or the institutions or the organizations that they care about? And those are political questions. We're not operating necessarily in an election itself, but we have to consider kind of put ourselves in the shoes of an elected official, and they're always thinking about elections. So we think about what are the political things that they care about. And lastly, our tactics. And we put this last because it's important to have your goal and your strategy first. But the tactics are the things that we do out in the real world. If you have seen Food and Water Watch at an event or gotten a phone call from us or an email from us, those are the tactics. We're asking people to contact their elected officials. We're asking people to show up to events. We're asking people to help make signs and banners for an event or things like that. So the tactics are what we do in the real world. And those are the things that we do to the decision maker, right? We want those things to be pointed at the person whose decision we are trying to influence. We choose tactics that allow us to not only put pressure on the decision maker, but to engage and bring more people in. So we choose tactics that will appeal to the people we're trying to organize, that make sense in the context of their lives and in the work that we're trying to do. We also want to do things that are fun and welcoming and inclusive. And so we're always constantly assessing what are the things that we can do out in the real world that bring more people in, that engage the base we already have, and also bring new people into the base. And again, these are things that we do to the decision maker. So they should be felt by the decision maker in kind of a concrete way. So some common ones would be being contacted by constituents, right? So if we're trying to get phone calls to an elected official, that is a constituent, a voter in their district directly making contact with them. We might have an event that is covered by the media, right? We want the decision maker's name and their decision and the implications of that to be covered in the media. So in the picture here on the slide, right, we've got the decision maker's name on that sign because we want it really clear, you know, if this was covered in the media or we're at their office or we're taking pictures, you know, who the decision maker is. And again, we want the decision maker to be hearing directly from people and organizations that are important to their kind of political considerations. So back to our strategy, who are the organizations, who are the people, the voters, the geographic areas that are important to them? We want to prioritize getting those people involved in the campaign and putting pressure on the decision maker. So again, the success of a campaign relies on having a really clear goal, a sound strategy where we answer lots and lots of questions about the people we're trying to organize and the decision maker we're trying to influence, and then smart and strategic tactics that put pressure on the decision maker and also bring more people into our campaign. I want to talk about a few of the campaigns that we're working on right now that hopefully you've heard about. The first one is obviously at the national level. We're really fighting back against the Trump-Musk agenda, and especially some of the cuts that are being proposed and will have to get approved by Congress. So we're really, really concerned about basically everything that Trump, Musk, and Republicans in Congress are trying to do. But there's some big proposed cuts that would be really harmful, including to healthcare, Medicaid specifically, to SNAP food benefits, to school lunches, and to food and water safety programs that millions and millions, almost every community across the country relies on these programs. And they want to cut all of this to pay for tax breaks for billionaires and corporations. The margins in Congress are really, really slim. And so we're working in about a dozen key congressional districts. These pictures are from two of them, one in New York and one in Pennsylvania, to peel off really just a handful of votes to try to stop this plan and these proposed cuts. So we're doing all sorts of things, and these are the tactics like I mentioned. So rallies, we're doing deliveries with petitions and letters from constituents. We're having volunteer meetings, we're doing call-in days, we're doing letters to the editor and getting local press coverage. All of these things are, again, tactics based on a strategy with a clear goal in mind to stop these cuts. Similarly, at the congressional level, there's a proposal to repeal an EPA rule that would require lead water pipes to be replaced over the next decade. Lead pipes are the leading source of lead exposure for millions of people across the country, which is obviously a huge problem that we've been working for years to try to address. Some Republicans in Congress want to repeal this rule and basically keep lead pipes going into people's homes and polluting people's water. We're working really hard to keep that rule in place and to make sure that those pipes get get replaced and that people's water gets cleaned up. So in some of these same congressional districts, we're working on this to make sure that this rule stays in place. And then at the state level, we're working to pass some really important policies. As you probably know, Food and Water Watch works at the state level and through state legislatures in most of the places where we work. And this year in several states, we are working with coalition partners and hundreds, if not thousands of volunteers to pass what we call climate superfund laws, which would force big oil and other polluters to pay billions of dollars for the damages that they've caused. These are pictures from New Jersey and California. We passed a bill like this in New York last year. We're working this year in California, Maryland, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. And there's bills in other states as well to, like I said, pass these climate superfund laws. So while we're doing a lot of defensive work in Congress and at the federal level, we're still moving forward and pushing forward at the state level. So again, all of our work is dependent on involving lots of people in our campaigns through coalition partners and volunteers and supporters like you. We always have a clear goal and a solid strategy and creative tactics to bring lots of people into the campaigns. So thank you all for being a part of that. Thanks, Janine.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for that overview of our strategy work. And thank you for the important work that you do to alter relations of power and to help us all understand the power we have collectively and to win real improvement in people's lives. All right. Thanks again, Thomas. Next up, we will hear about the current state of food and water with Food and Water Watch Public Water for All Campaign Director Mary Grant and Senior Food Policy Analyst Rebecca Wolf and U.S. Congressman Representative Ro Khanna after we take a 1-minute break. Welcome back. I am here with Mary Grant, Rebecca Wolf, and special guest U.S. Congressman Ro Khanna to discuss today's most pressing food and water issues. U.S. Representative Ro Khanna, who we'll see in just a little bit, is a leading progressive voice in the U.S. House of Representatives. He represents California's 17th congressional district, located in the heart of Silicon Valley, and is serving his 5th term. As chair of the House Oversight and Reform Environmental Subcommittee, Congressman Khanna brought the CEOs of 6 major fossil fuel companies before Congress to testify under oath about climate disinformation for the first time in history. He also held hearings to investigate the health harms associated with leaded aviation fuel, to implement better wildfire preparation measures, and to protect America's food supply from the threats posed by climate change. During the Inflation Reduction Act negotiations, Congressman Khanna played a key role in ensuring that climate provisions remained in the final deal. He'll be joining us with as a special guest today with a message about the Water Act. But first, let me introduce you to my colleagues, Mary Grant and Rebecca Wolf. Mary Grant is Food and Water Watch's Public Water for All campaign director. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in U.S. water utility policy and research. Since 2015, she has led Food and Water Watch's campaigns to support universal access to safe water in the U.S. by promoting responsible and affordable public provisions of water and sewer service. Prior to becoming campaign director, Mary was a senior researcher on water issues for Food and Water Watch for 7 years. She is a leading policy analyst on U.S. water utility privatization. Rebecca Wolf holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from American University and a Master's in Public Health from Johns Hopkins University. She joined Food and Water Watch as an intern in 2012, as staff in 2015, and she has organized countless online, state, and federal food and climate campaigns before joining the Food and Water Watch policy team. Today, she serves as the organization's senior food policy analyst, working to pass legislation that brings an end to food system consolidation and factory farms. Rebecca and Mary, thank you so much for being here. I will turn it over to Mary to get us started as we understand the current state of food and water, what specific challenges we face, and what we can do to make a difference.
Thanks, Janine, and thank you to everyone for joining us today and for all of your support. Rebecca and I will provide an overview of the national food and water landscape. But first, I want to acknowledge that there's a lot going on, and it can feel like you're being inundated or overwhelmed by the national news. That's by design. It's the strategy of the Trump administration to, in their parlance, flood the zone. But as we go through this overview, I want to emphasize 3 main points. 1, yes, the odds are against us. We're facing major threats to our basic food and water resources. 2, that doesn't mean we give up, but it is why our strategic campaigning is so critical, as Tom went over just moments ago, so we can leverage our power in a strategic way. And 3, together we can and are winning real victories to keep our food safe and our water clean. I want to provide a bird's eye view of how the GOP-controlled Congress is threatening our food and water. There are 2 main policy vehicles that Trump and his Republican allies are using to enact their vision of dismantling our government, looting it, and privatizing it. And it centers on how we fund our most basic services and programs. The first piece is the annual spending bill that funds agencies and programs like food safety inspections and clean water grants. In March, Congress passed a spending bill that cut critical programs like rural water and waste disposal grants, and USDA's conservation program, and the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. This bill funded the government through the end of September, and Congress right now is moving on the next annual spending bill, based on Trump's recent budget proposal that seeks to cut all essential government programs by nearly a quarter, including massive cuts to the EPA. The second major policy vehicle, legislative vehicle, is the budget reconciliation bill. This is a special process used when one party, in this case the GOP, controls both chambers of Congress, as well as the presidency. The Senate requires 60 votes to pass most bills, so legislation usually has to be at least somewhat bipartisan. But with budget reconciliation, the Senate can pass major funding and tax changes with a simple majority vote. Congress is moving forward with legislation that will cut trillions of dollars from critical programs like SNAP, food assistance, healthcare, and more to pay for at least $4.5 trillion in tax breaks that largely benefit corporations and billionaires like Elon Musk. Together, these priorities will be devastating for our most basic food and water protections. Already, right now, our nation's water infrastructure is aging and needs major updates. We see it every day as water main breaks flood roads and homes, as sewage spills contaminate our precious waterways. In total, according to EPA's latest assessments, our drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater systems need at least $1.3 trillion, trillion with a T, and improvements over the next 20 years. Just to comply with existing law. Fortunately, federal funding for water infrastructure simply is not keeping up with the need. It has plummeted 77% since its peak in the late 1970s in real terms. Federal funding peaked in the 1970s. Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law was a step in the right direction and a down payment on safe water, but it still only met a small fraction of what is needed. And that 5-year infusion of money runs out this year. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to dive into how the Trump administration is using his executive powers to attack our food and water. And she'll talk more about the state of food.
Thanks, Mary. Now, Food and Water Watch is poised to fight back against the threats that the Trump administration is making to our food and water, too. In his first 100 days, his team has made it clear that they want to decimate the federal government. We've seen tons of efforts to shrink federal funding and the federal workforce. Now, you probably know that at Food and Water Watch, we think these agencies are far from perfect. Since our inception 20 years ago, we've been fighting to make them better. But their functions are critical to keeping people safe. There are a myriad of dizzying actions at each of these agencies, but we just wanted to give you a snapshot today. At the United States Department of Agriculture, the Trump administration is eliminating ways that schools buy food from local farmers by cutting 2 federal programs that provided $1 billion in funding to schools and food banks to buy food directly from local farms, local ranchers, and producers. They're also withholding already allocated funds for conservation efforts on farms. When it comes to the Food and Drug Administration, we're worried about the huge reduction in staffing, which includes food safety experts like those working to ensure ingredients are not dangerous, and many of those working in the research on the bird flu epidemic. We've already seen multiple food safety programs that have been cut, including the Food Emergency Response Network, which is a critical national surveillance and coordination program on foodborne illnesses. At the Environmental Protection Agency, we're seeing huge slashes to environmental justice programs, including community projects to improve wastewater and drinking water systems. Among Trump's first actions in office was an unconstitutional freeze on all funds from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which stopped the release of an estimated $10 billion in funding for local water system projects. The freeze was then expanded to cover all loans and grants. So we've just seen a ton of issues already from the Trump administration. We're not going to sugarcoat it. Things are tough right now, and we are absolutely in the fight for our lives. Today, much of the food we eat is from a highly consolidated grocery, retail, and agriculture market. The recent bird flu crisis is really emblematic of this problem. Egg corporation Cal-Maine has pushed prices way higher than any of their growing costs, leading to $1 billion in windfall profits in a single year. All the while, factory farms where Cal-Maine and other corporations raise up to 1 million or more chickens in crowded conditions are a hotbed for disease. So under the status quo, the factory farm model could create the next pandemic. In fact, throughout the country, there are thousands of factory farms that produce vast quantities of waste laden with pollutants like fecal pathogens, nitrogen, phosphorus, pharmaceuticals, heavy metals. And it's hard to wrap your mind around just how much animal waste factory farms in the United States produce every year, 941 billion pounds every year. To keep this racket going, big ag bullies have used legal and legislative tactics to try to silence people by taking away their ability to sue a big company who has harmed them, or to create a local law or state law that has stronger and more protective standards than a federal law. So we're truly in the fight of our lives, and while this accounting may seem daunting, we're already holding the line and already cementing huge victories in each of these areas right now with your help and your support.
Together, we are making real impacts that improve people's lives. And just the last month, we secured 2 key milestones that we can build on to protect our food and water. First, congressional Republicans were seeking to repeal Biden's historic Let Out of Water rule using a special process known as the Congressional Review Act. The Let Out of Water rule will require most communities to replace and improve and remove toxic lead service lines within a decade. This is a huge public health protection. And if Republicans repealed that regulation using the Congressional Review Act, the EPA could never again propose a rule substantially the same, leaving these toxic pipes in place, perhaps for generations. You heard from Thomas about how our organizers and volunteers sprang into action to defend the rule. That happened just days after Trump's inauguration. And we secured the commitment from 2 key Republican Congress members to protect the rule. And now I'm happy to say the clock has run out on the special fast-tracked procedures of the Congressional Review Act. We effectively killed the resolution by preventing it from coming up from a vote. This is a huge victory. We're still waiting to hear from the Trump administration, though, if they will defend this let out of water rule in court against an industry lawsuit, or if Trump will roll it back. So we need to keep the pressure on. The second important victory is that thanks to our advocacy and many other concerned groups, Congress has excluded school meals from the list of budget cuts, at least for now. The budget resolution bill took aim at the program, but at the end of April, a key committee marked up its portion of the budget bill and did not include any cuts to the National School Lunch Program, which feeds 20 million children nationwide to prevent hunger while they learn. This is an encouraging win for people power, but the budget process is far from over, and we will continue to oppose the budget bill and fight any new attempts to cut those school lunches or to cut food assistance and other essential programs. So while we're defending against some of the most egregious attacks on our food and water from the Trump regime, we cannot lose sight of what we need. We must always continue to build and lift up our vision for a better world where everyone has safe food and clean water. That's why we support the Water Act, the Water Affordability, Transparency, Equity, and Reliability Act in Congress. Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Representative Ro Khanna, whom you'll hear from shortly, and Senator Bernie Sanders are leading this important effort in Congress. The Water Act is visionary legislation to create a trust fund to provide dedicated federal funding at the level EPA says is necessary to ensure that everyone has safe and clean water. So right now, I'm really excited. I get to pass it over to the Honorable Representative Ro Khanna, a champion for safe food and clean water, to talk more about why he is co-leading this landmark legislation. Thank you, Representative.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ro Khanna. I'm a congressman from Silicon Valley. Thank you to Food and Water Watch for hosting this event, for inviting me, and for working with me over the last many years to introduce the Water Act. We're introducing it again. I hope to pass it. Look, water is the most basic human right. Everyone in the world should have access to clean, affordable water. But it is a particular embarrassment that there are so many Americans who don't have access to clean, affordable water. The Water Act makes an investment in making sure we don't have lead pipes, in making sure that we have the proper sanitation for water, in making sure we have the proper distribution for clean water everywhere in our country. This is most urgent now when Musk and Trump are cutting funding from the EPA, cutting funding from transportation that keeps water clean and safe. Please join us in fighting for the Water Act. Thank you to Food and Water Watch for what you're doing.
Thank you, Congressman Ro Khanna, for your leadership for safe water. Rebecca also works with the representative on food issues, so I'm going to turn it back to her for a moment to talk about how we are and will win major victories for food.
Yes, thanks again, Mary and Congressman Ro Khanna. Today we're celebrating 20 years of grassroots power, and part of building a movement for safe food and clean water also requires building strong relationships with legislative champions like Representative Ro Khanna, and working with him to dream up, write, promote, and work to pass visionary legislation. And that's the Farm System Reform Act for food. And we're excited to continue to have Representative Ro Khanna as our champion on this legislation. This visionary legislation meets the scale of action necessary to transform our food and farming system on a timeline that reflects the urgency of its problems. So we know that the factory farm model is not an accident, and that only meaningful policy can steer us away. This legislation will revitalize independent family farm agriculture and rural communities by placing a moratorium on new and expanding large factory farms, phasing out existing large factory farms, holding corporate integrators, big ag, responsible for the harm caused by factory farms, providing a $100 billion voluntary buyout and transition program for farmers who want to move away from factory farms, strengthening the Packers and Stockyards Act,
restoring mandatory country of origin labeling, and prohibiting the USDA from labeling foreign imported meat as products of the USA. So the Farm System Reform Act is our North Star, but we have momentum and a vision, and we're already winning. We're seeing incredible victories, even though times are tough, like Mary and I talked about. Just a few months ago, a federal judge blocked two huge grocery retailers, Kroger and Albertsons, from merging. This merger would have threatened grocery prices even more, and our whole team was instrumental in this win. Food and Water Watch commented extensively with in-depth legal comments on new merger guidelines, many of which were adopted in the final guidelines that were then used to block this merger. Our organizers and volunteers also created the space for this win by working to introduce federal legislation like the Food and Agribusiness Merger Moratorium and Antitrust Review Act in Congress to block these very kinds of unfair and anti-competitive mergers. Over the years, we have had countless conversations with congressional staff, with Food and Water Watch members about the impacts of consolidation on consumers, workers, and farmers, delivering this huge win. Just this session in Iowa, our organizers and volunteers stopped a bill dubbed the Cancer Gag Act that would have granted immunity to the manufacturers of pesticides from lawsuits from people harmed by exposure to their products. It was an odious attempt at silencing those impacted by big agriculture. And recently in Oregon, Food and Water Watch organizers and volunteers passed a bill that significantly strengthens factory farm regulations to better protect our air and water and local communities. And this was the first significant legislation halting of the factory farm industry in quite some time. So it's crystal clear to us as policy experts that we need a dedicated, passionate base to take on these fights and win. With our combination of smart strategy and broad-based power, we are countering the Trump agenda. With dedicated people like you, Food and Water Watch is building a strident resistance movement whose power will go far beyond this administration. And as we celebrate 20 years together, we know our supporters, volunteers, and allies are stepping up for the communities in ways that we never dreamed possible.
Before we leave today, we want to give you 2 quick actions that you can take to protect our food and water. We will put the links in the chat box for you, and make sure to receive these links in a follow-up email after today's event. First, tell your members of Congress to oppose the budget bill and budget cuts that threaten access to safe food and clean water. Second, take a minute and tell EPA Administrator Ellie Zeldin to get toxic lead and PFAS out of our water by defending the historic regulations, the Lead Out of Water rule, and limits on PFAS in our water today in court. We really need EPA to step up and to defend these regulations from industry lawsuits. The threats to our food and water cannot be understated with the ever-growing corporate control of these essentials and the corporate influence of our democracy. But we know that safe food and clean water are also unifying messages and issues, and ones where we can bring people together to resist the profit-driven agenda and create real change that we need. So thank you all again for joining us today and for all your support and dedication to making our world one where everyone has safe food and clean water. I'll turn it back to Janine.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, Mary, and Representative Ro Khanna, for that detailed review of the current state of food and water. We're sharing the actions that Rebecca and Mary just talked about in the chat now, and we'll send them out in an email as well, so please be sure to check them out. And we will be back in just a minute with a panel of youth activists.
Hi everyone, my name is Allie Park and I'm currently a high school senior at Ramapo High School in Bergen County, New Jersey. I've been interning with Food and Water Watch since the fall of 2024. I was excited for this internship because I knew it would be an opportunity to not only learn how organizing happens behind the scenes, but also how different perspectives, my own and others, can be fused together to build community and real tangible change. Throughout my internship, I planned the New Jersey Youth Climate Action Gathering with fellow student activists at Rutgers University that took place this March. That planning included organizing speakers, a documentary screening, and workshops on topics ranging from youth involvement in legislative spaces to campus organizing to climate storytelling. The event brought together 55 young people from middle schoolers to recent college grads for a day of learning, connection, and inspiration. Helping young people find pathways into activism and showing that there's a place for everyone in this movement has been one of the most rewarding parts of my experience, and it's also why I'm so excited to be moderating today's panel, Where Are They Now? Building the Next Generation of Activist Leaders, where I'll get to talk to 3 past Food and Water Watch interns and hear about how their experiences have shaped the activists they are today. As a filmmaker, I'm passionate about storytelling. I love using creative mediums like documentary filmmaking and photojournalism to portray lived experiences that help propel the climate movement forward. Today's session is an amazing opportunity to hear stories from others who have stood exactly where many young activists stand today. I truly believe storytelling is a powerful way to build connection and community, and I'm honored to act as a vessel to share these journeys with all of you. This conversation is so important because firsthand experiences like the ones we'll hear today help us stay connected to the heart of this work. They remind us why building a livable future matters and how each of us at every stage plays a role in carrying the movement forward. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm excited for you to meet our amazing panelists and dive into their stories. Okay, so let's begin. Mei, what made you want to intern at Food and Water Watch in the first place?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm Mei. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based in Portland, Oregon. I interned with Food and Water Watch's legal team in fall 2024 during my final year of law school. As for why I wanted to intern at Food and Water Watch, I first learned about the org's vital work combating factory farms via environmental laws in 2024 after moving to Portland. The efforts of the organization's legal team showed me how I might blend my interests in animal, food, and environmental justice as a future attorney. During undergrad, I studied critical animal studies and volunteered with Food Empowerment Project, which helped inform my current interest in leveraging litigation to advance holistic food justice. I was particularly drawn to Food and Water Watch's unapologetic commitment to people over profit and to holding industry accountable for its untold harms against humans, animals, and the planet. I also appreciated the org's recognition that litigation is only one piece of the advocacy puzzle, with a particular emphasis placed on grassroots organizing.
Thank you. How about you, Mark? What drew you to Food and Water Watch?
Thank you, Allie, so much. My name is Mark Sanchez-Potter from the Hudson Valley in New York. So I first got involved in 2019 as an intern, and I got involved because there was a fracked gas plant literally 3 miles from my town that they wanted to repower the fossil fuel industry. And so I discovered, through a few rallies that this organization called Food and Water Watch was leading the charge against this fracked gas power plant. And so I got involved. I went to meetings, I went to rallies, I testified in City Hall against, this really dangerous power plant. And eventually some organizers, because I was working with the organizing team, asked me if I wanted to be an intern. I was amazed, and I've been connected with Food and Water Watch ever since. And I think it's been a really great opportunity that has allowed me to, really see the type of power that the climate movement and the environmental movement has. Like when we all come together, it's really impactful. It's really amazing.
Thank you. Juliana, could you tell us about why you joined Food and Water Watch?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Juliana. Sorry, there is a really, really bad echo. I don't know if people could mute their mics for a second. It sounds like there's 5 of me talking at the same time. Who was not there before, I apologize. I'm gonna turn down my volume and just speak. So my name is, thank you so much. My name is Juliana or Juli. I'm originally from Colombia and I'm based in New York. I was originally really interested in climate organizers in the youth grassroots space, and I organized with Fridays for Future. That is like a youth organization mostly made up of students that did different things. And we collaborated a lot with the New York chapter of Food and Water Watch. They were the first people that ever taught me how to lobby and how to do a lot of things. And we actually went to rallies together, spoke together, did a lot of similar campaigns in Albany and in the city. And so throughout many meetings with them, I realized that, oh, I'm really actually interested in how change happens. But I was a little stressed about what are the right tactics. Should we put more pressure, more accountability, do things that are a little bit more like rallies, marches, bird dogging, or should we, kind of stay by the books, have closed door meetings and chat? And something I really like about Food and Water Watch is that they do everything from legislative, they do climate litigation, but they also are not afraid to call up people when they need to because they know that this is a crisis and there's a timer on it. And so when I was doing a lot of the collaborations with Food and Water Watch, they're like, hey, you might as well get paid for this. Do you just want to hop on and be an intern? And that's what I did. And I've been so happy that I did.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, so Mei, what was one of the biggest lessons you learned while interning with Food and Water Watch?
One of the most rewarding parts of my internship was seeing how organizations like Food and Water Watch prioritize building broad coalitions with diverse regional and national groups to generate momentum for its efforts, both grassroots and legal. Cultivating this collective resistance and people power is essential when confronting entities that wield immense power, privilege, and profit. This was made obvious during one of the highlights of my internship, where I was tasked with leading a standing interview for an upcoming lawsuit with a small farmer in rural South Dakota. Having personally grown up and lived in cities most of my life, I rarely have had the chance to connect with allies from such different lived experiences and locales. Yet my lengthy conversation with this small farmer reminded me that, despite our contrasting experiences, our shared values ran deep, and that harnessing solidarity is essential in the face of corporate consolidation and regulatory capture. Too often, my legal work and legal studies have felt pretty abstracted from the real-world reasons that motivate it, but my internship at Food and Water Watch helped me rekindle that connection.
Yeah, it's similar for me. Actually, I came from a background where I already was around a lot of coalition buildings and the grassroots spaces that I was in. But, and I know the power of it and it was really, really, like, I thought it was awesome and it was really inspiring. But then when I came onto Food and Water Watch, something I noticed was the flip side of that, which is that it just takes one person to do so much to change a school curriculum, to get a composting project going, to get your workplace to change the methodology that they do things. If they get if they waste a lot of water, if they pollute, if they don't take care of their waste responsibly. And every job can be a climate job, but Food and Water Watch, like your phone banking, your getting signatures, you're tabling at fairs or what have you. And it really just takes connecting with one person who will hop on a Zoom with you and say, yes, I will testify in this hearing actually, or I will call my representative. And so much will happen out of that. And so I agree. I think coalition building and solidarity is key to our work, but also just having someone say, hey, we're going to have 4 people in a Zoom meeting. We're going to take over the world. And none of us are climate, we don't have an educated climate background with a degree and everything, but they're just meeting and they say, we want to protect our communities, and so much will get done. So it really just takes that one person.
Yeah, I really like that perspective. Mark, is there anything that surprised you about the work?
Politicians tend to shy away when you call them out and try to hold them accountable, I think. So if you're bird dogging a politician, they might deflect or they might be like, oh, I don't have time right now. But most people understand that the climate is changing and they might not understand like the scientifics behind it, but they understand, yeah, it doesn't snow as much anymore, or we're having forest fires now. This is so weird for this area, right? And I think it's important when you meet with people to listen to them and to understand where they're coming from. Because each community, they're coming at this from a different perspective. But they know that like there's basic human rights and basic decency that they want. They want clean air, they want clean water. And so listening to them, I think, is really important. But also, it's really important to just get people involved. You know, they want to do something, right? And I think that we're not meant to be saviors. We're meant to be allies and to co-create, right? So I really think that people are aware of what's going on. They just maybe sometimes they need help, or maybe they need to learn a skill or a tool in order to push this forward.
Yeah, totally. Okay, to broaden the topic a bit, May, how did your internship with Food and Water Watch prepare you for the future, and what is it that you kind of hope to do with all that you've learned?
Absolutely. So I've recently wrapped up law school, and for the next 2 years, I'll be clerking from here in Portland on the Oregon Court of Appeals with the Honorable Judge Christina Hellman. There, I hope to continue honing the legal research and writing skills that I built during my internship, as well as gain a glimpse of the inner workings of the judicial system. After that, I'm hoping to seek a litigation position at a nonprofit where I can advocate for animal food and environmental justice, using that experience both at Food and Water Watch and the experience gained from behind the bench as a judicial clerk. In the future, I hope to see the movement continue to build bridges, deepen coalitions, and encourage broad citizen political engagement. I really like what Mark said about co-creating with the masses. All of this work is work that Food and Water Watch excels at. I'm especially interested in how we can continue to use environmental laws to rein in factory farms and prevent the erosion of these environmental laws in the first place, particularly given the current political climate.
Awesome. Juliana, what do you hope for the future of the climate movement?
Well, I think that we have to balance our optimistic with our very real circumstances at the moment. So right now we're in a really challenging place with the federal government. I myself was affected with a lot of my initiatives and projects being canceled by the federal government, the National Science Foundation grants being taken away. At the same time, I've learned so much from Food and Water Watch and other organizing about how we are fighting the good fight and people power is winning. And if they feel that they have to utilize all of these strategies against us, is because they know that we are effective and the people are effective. And ultimately, no one person, no one government will take away our ability to protect each other and hold our communities to a standard where we're always growing, changing, protecting each other, and presenting the solutions that our individuals' communities need. And so I think that we're kind of like my mom said, and I think in Spanish it makes more sense, but we're like drops of water, where we're always hitting that rock where you have to be a drop of water, but ultimately that dent becomes a hole, becomes a river. And that's what we are. And you cannot stop us. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about the future of the climate movement, knowing that we have a big fight ahead of us, but that these are the right people that I want to be under these circumstances with.
Completely agreed. Mark, any final thoughts for the climate movement going forward? What do you hope for in the future?
So I think change takes time, and I know that slow sucks. And we've all experienced that, right? We want our wins to be really, really big and really, really impactful. And we have had wins. So I think that that's also important to realize. But also, like, it's going to take getting to critical mass. We're getting there. We have more people that every day are joining the climate movement. But we need to get to critical mass, where eventually we tip the scale in favor of people power, right? And not these multi-trillion-dollar corporations that are killing our earth. It's going to take all of us. It's going to take just grassroots organizing, and it's going to be slow, but there's always movement going forward. And that does leave me hopeful. That does, allow me to know that what I'm doing within the community, and by showing up where I can, we can really see those small ripples and those changes really starting to, take place. And I'm really blessed. I'm really hopeful for all that.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing, and thank you everyone for being here listening. This has been wonderful. I'm left feeling very inspired, and I can't wait for the next 20 years of Food and Water Watch.
Thank you again, Allie, Mei, Juliana, and Mark. Thank you to all of our great speakers today, to our host committee and our sponsors, and to all of you for being here today and for your generous contributions. I am excited to announce that so far we have raised a total of $194,000 between tonight and our New York benefit reception last week. We are only $6,000 away from raising $200,000 for our 20th anniversary. Please consider donating, and remember that every dollar you are able to give before midnight tonight will be matched dollar for dollar up to $30,000. Again, we do not take any corporate funding, so we are not beholden to anyone other than the health of our communities and our planet. Thank you so incredibly much for all of your generosity. Thank you for showing up. It is now time for me to introduce our 2025 Food and Water Watch honoree video. I had the pleasure of meeting these three incredible humans in person this past Tuesday at our New York benefit reception, and it was immediately clear how committed they are to the work that we're all doing together, and also how charismatically and humbly they bring us all along in the important work that they do. Congratulations to Ken Schles, Steve Max, and Jackie Kendall, Food and Water Watch's 2025 honorees.
We are so thrilled to be here today to honor three extraordinary individuals who've made a huge contribution to the work we do at Food and Water Watch.
Our first honoree is Ken Schles, an award-winning photographer and environmental activist. Ken has been a longtime volunteer with Food and Water Watch. He's able to use his photography to help us tell our story, mobilize people to take action, but is also involved in every piece of the puzzle in winning campaigns in New York.
The way that I first got involved with Food and Water Watch, through the course of the Williams pipeline fight, where Food and Water Watch was playing a vital role, and they were taking the lead on a lot of campaigns. I saw that they really had the effective means and effective approach to organizing other groups, and I sort of fell in with the work that they were doing. We have a lot of wins with Food and Water Watch. The campaigns are very targeted, the campaigns are very effective, and it moves the ball forward. It's really important for me as an artist to engage audiences. I think as activists, we need to do the same. We need to bring people around towards the ideas that we're trying to talk about. And I think it's important for people to understand that the things that we're fighting, we're not fighting these faraway things that are happening to other people. We're fighting things that are happening to us within our own homes, within our own families. There's systems of oppression that keep people from living their lives to the fullest. And through the work that I do with Food and Water Watch, I think we're able to force our government to come to more equitable solutions for everyone. And I think we're going to need to do that as we move forward if we're going to solve this climate crisis.
Ken, Thank you so much for your activism, for your leadership, for your photography. We love working with you, and we're so glad to have you as a volunteer leader on the Food and Water Watch team.
We'd also like to recognize two people who have a special place in my heart and at Food and Water Watch.
Jackie, Kendall, and Steve Max are lifelong organizers and activists who together have trained thousands of organizers to develop winning strategies for advancing environmental, economic, and social justice. They are co-authors of the incredible Organizing for Social Change Midwest Academy Manual, which serves as the foundation for the organizing work we do here at Food and Water Watch.
What I think we mainly bring, and what the training is designed to bring, is a framework for planning.
So it's, what do you want to win? What do you have as an organization to be able to do it? And what do you have to build to do it? Who are you going to organize? Who can give you what you want, the decision maker? And then tactics is how you go about doing that.
It takes power to win. It's how you can make public officials do something that they are under great pressure not to do. How to get them to do the right thing when they're under great pressure to do the wrong thing. What's unique about Food and Water Watch is that we can't be bought. We don't advocate fake solutions. We don't greenwash the corporate line. I won't tell you who does, but we don't.
They think strategically and organizationally, and you see it in their victories.
Well, a lot of people say the fights that Food and Water Watch takes on are unwinnable, but it's not like Food and Water Watch thinks that. I mean, they're not for jumping into unwinnable fights. They have a strategy. They figured out a way that it can be won, right? It's only folks outside who think it's unwinnable. We know we can win these things.
I mean, Food and Water Watch has done this over and over. I think the most striking example is their work on fracking. When they first, called for a fracking ban, so many other organizations, even environmental organizations, just laughed at them. They thought it was impossible, you couldn't do it. But they did it, and they were hard-fought, but very strategic campaigns. And that's what's exciting. They're willing to take on the hard fights. They're strategic, and they win. And on top of everything else, the people are great. They've been great to work with, and they're fun. You gotta have fun while you're doing this.
Thank you, Jackie and Steve, for all you've done for me and for Food and Water Watch. I can truly say that most of what I know about organizing people and building political power, you taught me.
We would not be the organization we are today without you.
This is a time when it's essential to support Food and Water Watch because the Trump administration is rolling back all of the gains that we've made in the climate arena.
Food and Water Watch is on the front lines doing the work that needs to be done. There's really no reason to be on the sidelines anymore.
You gotta get out there, give money, volunteer, and given the current political circumstances that we're in, wow, Food and Water Watch needs you now. And we need Food and Water Watch.
Congratulations again to our honorees. Thank you all again for being here with us today. Thank you to our host committee, our sponsors, our speakers, panelists, and honorees. We have recorded this conference. I'll send out a link to that recording to all of you via email. Please remember our generous dollar-for-dollar match is happening through midnight tonight. Let's see if we can get that final $6,000. Thank you all again for being here today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
As we celebrate our 20th anniversary, I want to thank you for taking the time to volunteer with us, for investing in our work with your donations, for showing up to countless rallies, protests, lobby days.
We are so grateful for your commitment to creating the world that we all want to live in.
In the next 20 years, Food and Water Watch will continue taking uncompromised stances for clean and affordable food and water and a livable climate.
Food and Water Watch will continue being a major force with a wider network of organizational allies and volunteers protecting our democracy and the most basic resources we all need to survive.
This holistic approach will enable us to make substantial strides towards achieving environmental justice, ensuring that we have a legacy of healthier communities and a more sustainable, equitable future for all.
And we're only going to continue to grow in strength, grow in capacity, and growing in ability to take on the greedy corporations that are contaminating our environment while driving up prices and reaping record profits.
And we will do that through mobilizing people power, making sure that the people's voice is stronger than the corporate interests who want to buy our government.
We don't take corporate money, and that's hugely important to me because corporate greed is at the heart of so many of these issues we face. When I look at the collective power that was built in 20 years, I'm so hopeful for what our grassroots movement will look like 20 years into the future.
In the next 20 years, we have to drastically scale up our work at Food and Water Watch. This is the critical window for us to end the use of fossil fuels.
We've accomplished so much in the last 20 years, but there is so much more to be accomplished, and we can't do it unless we do it together.
And we have the know-how, the passion, the grassroots power to fill the next 20 years with meaningful, real protections for our planet that make a livable future not just a dream, but within our reach.
Food and Water Watch. Fight like you live here.